Remakes and remasters have been around for almost as long as gaming has in general. They were often considered by the gaming audience as conversions originally, as it was usually a case of a game being ported over to a new format or new region with a few little upgrades or refinements added on. Back then, when a game went gold, there was no internet to update it. You had to re-release it in some sort of format.
I used to be with it, but then they changed what it was. Now what I'm with isn't it, and what's it seems weird and scary to me. It'll happen to you.
Today I'm going to talk about the modern gaming industry's obsession with what I dubbed the RRR game. The re-release, the remaster, and the remake. I'll go through the pros and cons of each, and which I personally prefer, and why publishers nowadays won't leave these old games alone. Welcome to the Deep Dive, where I take a long look at gaming and talk about subjects I find interesting. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy the video, and let's dive straight in. The earliest example I could find of one of these old remake/remaster hybrids is 1985's Pitfall 2 Lost Caverns, which was essentially a graphical overhaul of Sega's Pitfall and Pitfall 2 alongside some new level layouts. The idea behind these reprints and re-releases were not just to patch out a few bugs, but to bring in a new audience to the series. In modern times, game companies use them to gauge interest in old franchises alongside cashing in on nostalgia, which isn't unique to the gaming industry. To properly answer the question of what I personally think developers should do with an old game, we need to explore the benefits and drawbacks of the three different RRR game types: remasters, remakes, and re-releases. First, let's start with the least used option in the modern gaming landscape, the re-release. Usually this option is skipped over by publishers due to the lack of appeal to a new audience, and whilst there might be a die-hard fandom ready to defend the game to the ends of the earth, usually this is a loud minority of players. A re-release is an old game that's ported to a new, modern platform, with more or less nothing changed at all. Visually and gameplay wise, it's exactly the same game you played back in the day. It may have a new launcher or menu screen, but everything else remains identical, warts and all. What instantly comes to mind when I think re-release are the original Doom, Skyrim, and Resident Evil 4. Does It Play Doom became a meme because it exists on practically every platform now, even down to the smart fridge or a Tesla. Likewise with Skyrim and Resident Evil 4, taking an incredibly popular game with such robust and timeless game mechanics that can transcend platforms is a great idea. In terms of game preservation, re-releases become essential as we move more and more into the digital age. For example, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker has been stuck on the PS3 for so long there's a lot of younger gamers who've never tried it, so when it was announced as part of the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 2, it was great to see.
I don't know how to put this, but I'm kind of a big deal.
Up until the remake of Demon's Souls on PS5, this was also the case with that game. Although as you can see, we're already crossing wires when we come to the definitions of these RRR games, as the core reason behind their existence remains the same. A re-release frees up the developer's original vision from a lost platform, allows it to run on modern machines, gives you the nostalgia hit, and has the loud minority appeased. But why is it that publishers typically don't take this route? Well, the reason for this is pretty straightforward. Not very many people outside of the gamers who played it originally actually buy re-releases. Unfortunately, regardless of how good the original game was, whether that gameplay stands the test of time or if it's cheap, the majority of the modern audience are still stuck in the mentality that graphical fidelity is king. There's also the drawback of the control scheme remaining unchanged, such that people find the controls unintuitive and obtuse. Nowadays, people are used to picking up a shooter and instinctively knowing crouch is B, aim is left trigger, shoot is right trigger. So when they pick up a game where it's A to shoot, it feels outdated to them when they don't have the nostalgia factor from playing it previously. This is typically why a remaster is preferred in terms of the effort put in versus the potential new customer base. This is because often the control scheme gets updated to something more aligned with modern expectations. Re-releases most certainly have their place in gaming, and I love that platforms like GOG, aka Good Old Games, exist, where they often make deals with publishers to arrange re-releases of old games, such as the deal they made with Capcom to get the old Resident Evil games onto their platform, which according to GOG themselves, almost didn't happen due to Capcom believing the remakes were superior and not valuing the original titles. Game preservation is important, and re-releases are a huge part of that. We need to keep these old games alive so we can appreciate the works of art they are. They don't need to be replaced or written over, they should be celebrated. If you want to bring in a new audience but don't want to spend too much money or time on development, the next stage of the RRR release model to consider is the remaster. Remasters are not just a re-release, they offer significant upgrades to the frame rate and resolution whilst keeping the core gameplay unchanged. There may be some extra accessibility options or menu changes, but for the most part it's the same game with a new coat of paint and likely a more modern control scheme. A great example of a modern remaster is the first Halo game in the Master Chief Collection. This game lets you switch between the old graphics and the new graphics so you can see what it used to look like versus what they've built it up to now. Another great example is the fairly recent Elder Scrolls Oblivion remaster. Originally developed and published by Bethesda, this extremely in-depth RPG had a laundry list of persistent world features to keep running, such that people thought a remaster would break everything. Instead, the Oblivion remaster developed by Virtuous under Todd Howard's watchful eye remastered the original game by keeping the guts of the game intact whilst using Unreal Engine 5 to improve the visuals. This allowed Virtuous to create what is, in my opinion, the perfect remaster. Oblivion Remastered played exactly the same as the original, but the animations and visuals were overhauled so it looked like how I remembered it. This is what a remaster should capture, not just a polishing of some rough edges, but a visual overhaul so great you don't lose the nostalgia you had for the original game. Yes, there's still the standard Bethesda jank that comes with the creation engine underneath, but there's enough of an overhaul here for new audiences to take notice and buy a copy of the game. When looking at a remaster, it may seem like it can cover all bases. A fresh coat of paint to draw in the new folks alongside an overhaul of the control scheme to align it with more modern titles. Why would the game studios take the time to create a remake if a remaster has it all? Well, this is where a more critical eye needs to come in. As I said earlier with regards to the Oblivion remaster, whilst the game looks visually great, gameplay wise it's still janky. Things still teleport around the room, people still stare at you soullessly, combat is still wooden and not very impactful. Without a change to the core gameplay to match the advancements in the genre, many newcomers to the game can get frustrated with old systems like UI, pathing, and combat that feels out of place. I personally downloaded a remaster of a game from the Nintendo 64 called Shadow Man that I got stuck on as a kid, thinking I'd breeze through its semi-open world levels with no issue. As it turned out, due to its game design, even as a 28-year-old man, I got stuck in the exact same part of the game. It's also worth noting, you can lose the original game's atmosphere and art design during the remastering process. By far the best example of this issue is in the Silent Hill HD collection. The original Silent Hill game from 1999 introduced the extremely thick fog to cover the fact that the game's draw distance was incredibly small. That means if you turned the fog off, you'd see textures and items popping into view a few meters in front of you all of the time, due to the hardware limitations that no longer existed in 2012 when the remaster was developed. As a result, the fog was practically removed, meaning the claustrophobic atmosphere and the dour visuals pretty much disappeared in one fell swoop. The fog gave the series its personality alongside a feeling of unease and claustrophobia, and with the severe lack of it, the game suffered significantly. This drawback isn't just limited to Silent Hill either. The more recent Croc Remaster looked empty by comparison to its original version due to how clean everything looked, so a lot of the late game stages were just black voids with a few boxes once the personality had been stripped away.
What are your thoughts on this momentous occasion? Your neutralness?
I have no strong feelings one way or the other.
Many gamers consider this remastering epidemic as sterilizing the original vision, making everything so clean graphically that it loses the original charm and just looks wrong. And in cases like Croc, it's hard to disagree with them. In these instances, people advocate a re-release over a remaster, but there is a third, much more expensive option for game publishers to take. Remakes are by far the most difficult of the RRR games to make, as they have to strike the balance between old and new, bringing in new audience members whilst keeping the old ones happy. On top of this, it has to feel old enough for the new fans to not get bored, as if you make a shot-for-shot game with no sequences changed, they'll happily dock you points for not introducing new elements. A remake, of course, is a brand new game, wherein the original narrative and themes are kept intact, alongside the locations and characters, but the gameplay and graphics have changed dramatically. You may also find that certain sections are rewritten or omitted entirely from the finished product, whether that be due to modern sensibilities, or a section where the original gameplay didn't quite hit the right notes, and the old creators wanted to give it a makeover to represent what they originally wanted to convey. This is such a fine line to tread, as you can end up annoying old school fans for changing too much or too little, but you have to make sure the brand new game appeals to the new audience members too. One of the first remakes that truly caught my eye personally was that of the first Resident Evil game. The old game had very dated live action intros for each of the characters, alongside some truly horrific voice acting.
Jill, here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
With the original being developed on the PlayStation, when the remake was launched on the GameCube in 2002, I simply had to have it. All of the voice lines had been rewritten, scenes had been reframed, and gameplay sections had been added, mainly the Lisa Trevor section, which is often lauded as one of the scariest and most effective persistent enemies in gaming. As an example of a remake that removed and reworked entire sections, we can again look at the Resident Evil series with Resident Evil 4. The original Resident Evil 4, again on the GameCube, had some very misogynistic parts to the game, and although they were fleeting and mostly throwaway lines of dialogue, they didn't fit into the modern sensibilities, and Capcom weren't comfortable with Leon being portrayed in this way anymore. Whilst there were some other small-scale changes like this, which general audiences as a whole weren't too upset about, there were some significant changes to gameplay sections. Notably the UE3 section with the containers from the original game. A particularly tense, timed encounter which made for a fantastic horror set piece was completely removed, pushing it out to the Assignment Ada DLC in the remake. Not only this, but Assignment Ada was bundled into the original game as an unlockable mode, rather than a piece of paid DLC. Granted, the rework to this mode was significant and perhaps warranted a separate price tag, but usually you expect these types of RRR games to come with all the bells and whistles already included. The minecart section was also reworked, arguably for the better this time, but there were a lot of small changes that added up as a whole to a completely different experience. This is exactly what you want in a remake of a game, but that always comes with a loud subsect of people wanting the original gameplay set pieces kept as they were, which all comes down to personal taste at the end of the day. Many people want to see what they came for remade shot for shot, which you can see a lot in Hollywood when they remake movies. Unfortunately, you can never appeal to everyone. If you look at the blind claw enemy section, you can see that this has been significantly upgraded in almost every way compared to the original, and 99% of people wouldn't argue that they wanted it the same, but if you took that blind enemy out of the jail, didn't have any tension or build up, and made it into an action set piece, you'd have a less than positive reaction for sure.
Wait a minute. This isn't my world. Disappointed!
There is a way you can implement your own changes to the game during a remake that doesn't necessarily remove set pieces or cause you to rework them in such a way that old fans would be annoyed. And the best example of this would be the recent Silent Hill 2 remake. The remake of Silent Hill 2 was widely praised upon its release in October of 2024, and despite its reworking of certain sections which inevitably lost the good graces of some fans, many agree that it's a great companion piece to the original game. However, it wasn't until the game was out for a few weeks that people noticed that Bloober Team, who developed the remake, had snuck something in right under the players' noses. Throughout the course of the game, there are various collectibles you can find such as files, notes, and some Polaroid pictures. These Polaroids show an obscure image of what appears to be completely random items and locations. What a keen Reddit user managed to figure out is, if you count the most frequent item in the photo, this corresponds to a letter in the message written on the back of it. Once you have all the photos, decipher each of the letters and put them in order, the message spells out reads, "You've been here for 2 decades. When I first read this message online, I got chills. The implication is that Bloober Team is saying yes, this remake doesn't quite fit the original, because it isn't the original. The protagonist James Sunderland is stuck in a time loop, forever playing out the events of the game over and over again in slightly different ways as a punishment for what he did, which I won't spoil here. This is a perfect way to create and justify a remake. Whilst Konami clearly wanted to make this game so they could cash in on nostalgia, otherwise they'd have started with the first game, Bloober Team took the opportunity to create a narrative with it. This not only causes you to forgive any changes within the gameplay and set pieces, but also allows you to view the narrative in a different way. It actively encourages you to go back and play the original rather than simply replacing it. Hopefully this new style of parallel storytelling gets into the recently announced Bloober Team remake of Silent Hill 1, as there's some fun things they can do with the narrative there. And this is where we get onto the negative aspects of remakes in general, the fact many people believe remakes to be a way of rewriting history. The original version of a game deserves to exist, and in my opinion should be available on modern platforms no matter how old it is.
How do you do, fellow kids?
What?
That being said, most game companies don't bother re-releasing their old games in any format, and often people have to resort to emulation to be able to play them. With story beats and gameplay sections being reworked, it gives publishers the option to change narratives, character arcs and motivations into something completely different. You can take a wisecracking, cocky and plot armor covered hero and make them dark and brooding, stripped of what some would consider their core personality. You can also see significant story changes where certain characters are introduced, but they don't have the original impact they had because of how the remake has been done. Again, looking at Resident Evil, they tease Albert Wesker at the end of the Resi 4 remake, but in the quote-unquote remake verse, this is the first time you ever see him, so it only means something to the fans of the original series. It's a slippery slope developers end up on when they start changing things around, and it doesn't always end up for the better. Modern publishers love a remake for a couple of reasons. The first being that they aren't taking a risk on a new IP. They don't need to spend a lot of time with writers creating something from scratch. This goes double for the environments, character and enemy design. Yes, you have to make a more up-to-date version, but the bones are there for you to already build on. The second is that they are cashing in on nostalgia. Even the people who are avid fans of the original will jump into the remake to see what's the same and what's different, and in the best case scenario, both can be entirely separate entities to enjoy. This can boost both sales of the original and sales of the remake, as some fans who would never buy a modern Konami title would bite your hand off for a Silent Hill 3 remake, for instance. On top of this, with the completely remade visuals, overhauled control scheme and potential gameplay improvements, modern audiences are significantly more likely to jump in than if it were a simple re-release, meaning the profit for this type of game tends to be significantly higher than any other RRR game release. Now we've been through the 3 RRR game types along with their pros and cons, let's do a little recap and I'll explain to you which one I personally prefer. Let's start with re-releases. They're cheaper to make, take less time to develop, and hit nostalgia with fans. However, they can alienate modern audiences, have poor controls, and look very rough on modern hardware. Then when you look at remasters, they cost a little more than a re-release, they take a little bit longer to develop, they do hit nostalgia with fans, and they're more appealing to modern audiences. However, the control scheme may not be reworked, the old game design could put people off, cracks could show in the environments, story elements could remain controversial, and it may not justify the asking price depending on what it is. And then finally looking at remakes, you get a brand new game with enough tweaks to keep things fresh, nostalgia again hits with fans, you get updated controls and gameplay for modern audiences, and it has the option to expand into further sequels and franchise entries. And the potential drawbacks are that the original game could be lost to time. Not all remake sections are necessarily going to be better, story and characters can be sanitized to the point of losing the heart of the original game, they're expensive to make, and they have a significantly longer development time than both of the other RRR game types. It goes without saying that whichever one of these a gamer, developer or publisher would pick can change massively depending on who they were and what they were looking to do. It's a matter of personal opinion when it comes to the choice I'd make in this video. My answer is a bit of a cop-out, as my immediate jerk reaction is to just have a ground-up remake. I've tried going back to the original versions of games minus the rose-tinted glasses, and more often than not, I find I just can't get away with the horrible controls, camera, and stilted gameplay. This may not be everyone's stance. I know there's a great many people who would pick the original re-released any day, and I actually agree that it's important to keep the original game and vision of the developers alive. I'd like to shout out here the incredible work of Night Dive Studios, who are putting a lot of work into keeping old games accessible with their remasters of various games. Yes, it's not a straight re-release, but their remaster work is definitely more than a lot of developers and publishers are doing to keep old games relevant. In my opinion, I'd rather have a remake and a re-release. I find a remaster kind of becomes superfluous if you do it this way. Re-releasing the original on modern platforms, but then also releasing a remake along with it, both pieces of media can then be enjoyed without being detrimental to each other. You'd also likely get more money for it if you bundle them both together as a package deal, and you'll not only get old school fans on board, but there'd be a whole new modern audience on your side too. The remake itself should be faithful to the original, but I never want a shot-for-shot recreation. I'd like to have certain set pieces tweaked, characters and their motivations properly fleshed out, and enemies upgraded in terms of their AI and their looks. Doing so creates a brand new experience with a sense of nostalgia that can't be bested. Playing a game and thinking, I can't wait to see how X section turns out, is one of the best feelings playing a remake. If they happen to implement something clever like in Silent Hill 2's remake, I'm all for it, making it add an extra layer to the already existing mythos. And that's my formal answer, preserve history with a re-release side by side with a remake, so everyone's happy, and just send the remaster to the dump. So now it's time to answer the actual question, just to keep the commenters on my last few deep dive videos happy. Why is the modern gaming landscape littered with constant RRR gaming releases? Well, the most straightforward reason is risk.
Yes! No! It's too risky, it's too risky!
Not to get all capitalism bad and the state of the world these days, as this is a gaming channel, the constant push for perpetual growth in companies and having to ensure that profits are higher than last year to keep obscenely rich shareholders happy has caused most game publishers to become completely risk averse. This means instead of creating new IP with new ideas like most developers would love to do, instead they're digging into the old trough of nostalgia to try and find something with brand recognition that can excite the older millennial gamers like me.
32, 33, 35, 35, 35, 38, 39, 40. Elder millennial.
And also have the younger generation introduced to something as brand new. That's why the remake tends to be favoured with a bigger budget behind it, because it can appeal to both markets. This is why we never see anything as strange or mid-budget as Bionic Commando anymore. A totally throwaway but somewhat fun game that tries something different. There's just too much risk involved. As a result, we see more sequels and RRR games as they're likely to sell well, and it's hard to argue because they actually often do. This trend isn't just restricted to gaming though. As a kind of mirror to gaming these past years, Hollywood is also obsessed with remaking old films and creating endless sequels in worn-out franchises just to make sure their film has brand recognition, whether it fits the narrative or not. It's worth noting that the reason that companies chase this nostalgia is because we are all influenced by it. We buy these games, we watch these movies, we crave the old things we used to love, likely because of the current state the world is in. With games like Resident Evil 9 seemingly moving away from legacy characters and introducing new ones, again something Hollywood is starting to do calling them legacy sequels, I can only hope other franchises so late in their series do the same thing. Whilst there'll always be people championing a sequel or remake of their favourite game, there's no reason we can't explore new characters, new locations and new stories with familiar mechanics iterated into something completely different. Every now and then you do get some incredible new IP like Clair Obscur Expedition 33, which aside from the awkward title will definitely be making waves at the Game Awards come the end of the year. Gaming has never been more varied and offered more to us as players, but if you're looking for games that aren't existing franchises, you do need to start looking to AA studios or indie studios for the amazing games they provide. It's a shame that a constant need for profit and the constant fear of making a flop has AAA publishers so risk averse. But at this point, unless you have someone like Hideo Kojima at the helm with a proven track record, it's going to be tough to get new IPs off the ground. I will always champion new IP and new games over a RRR title. Game preservation should definitely be a thing, and I'm glad to some extent we do get it for some games, but overall the game industry needs to stop capitalizing on nostalgia and start moving on to bigger and better things. New gameplay systems, new types of narrative, new mechanics we've never seen before, instead of just homogenizing the old ones to fit with modern games. Whether it be a remaster, re-release or remake you're after, just remember, new things can always be better. I hope that one day soon AAA gaming publishers realize that graphical fidelity isn't the be-all end-all of a game and start focusing on fun and fresh gameplay mechanics to push forward the medium into something great, but until then, prepare for more nostalgia and yet more RRR gaming. And there goes another deep dive into gaming. Are you a fan of the RRR game trend that's being followed in the current climate? Or, like me, do you want new and shiny things? Let me know down in the comments what you think, and don't forget to drop a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. If you want to chat to me directly, you can always drop me a message on x.com/gracious_rhino. I'm Gracious Rhino, look after each other, and I'll catch you soon.